There is a horror film you may not have seen, but you've definitely heard of it, because not only is it considered the pinnacle of Korean horror, earning Korea's highest box office in just 5 days after release, but more importantly, it has been defined by many as the standard by which horror films are measured. So that raises the question, just how terrifying can it be? Some people cried out of fear, while others had to watch through the gaps between their fingers. So today, I'll take you on an immersive journey into the top of the world's 7 most haunted places, Gonjiam. Just to prove their courage, 2 reckless young men broke into one of Korea's 3 most cursed houses, the abandoned Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital. The most infamous and dangerous place here was room 402, said to be a door that no one who tried to open ever lived to tell about. But they refused to believe in such superstition, grabbing a screwdriver and a hammer to pry it open. Yet, as one boy laughed, something eerie happened. The laughter that had already stopped echoed faintly from behind them. Then, as a ghostly face flashed past the door next to them, the recording cut off, and the 2 were never seen again. Very soon, this incident stirred heated debate online, with countless people arguing over whether the footage was real or fake. And for Hajun, an adventure streamer, this was a chance he could not miss, especially when a sponsor offers a huge advertising fee of 500 million won if his live stream reaches 1 million viewers. He immediately decides to investigate Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital for himself. Based on his research beforehand, he learned that the hospital, since opening in 1961, had been rated the best psychiatric facility in Korea. But strangely, in 1979, all the patients suddenly took their own lives, and the director mysteriously disappeared. From then on, endless rumors spread. Some said it had originally been a mass grave where Japanese soldiers executed locals, and to cover it up, they built the hospital on top. Others said it was actually a secret government torture site, and the patients were not suicides, but victims murdered by the director. As for the director's disappearance, people said she ended her own life in collapse. So in the years since the hospital closed, people claimed to have heard cries from within, and even seen wandering spirits. But the more sinister the stories became, the more thrill-seekers wanted to challenge the place. And as expected, most who entered never came out, their whereabouts forever unknown. The next day, with everything prepared, Hajun set out with his team of 7 toward the Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital. Among them were 3 female streamers, Ah-yeon, Ji-hyun, and Charlotte, while the other 3 were Seung-wook in charge of operations, Sung-hoon as the cameraman, and Jae-yoon as the editor. Since the main entrances were sealed and patrolled by guards, to avoid trouble, they set up their temporary base on the back hill. When night fell, they tested the live stream equipment, put on body cams that could show both their faces and point of view, and the 6 of them set out for the hospital. Team leader Hajun remained at base, in charge of the overall broadcast. After a long trek, they reached the hospital gates, and under Hajun's command, the live stream officially began. The moment they stepped inside, an icy chill rushed out, and the graffiti covering the walls only added to the eerie atmosphere. Charlotte took out holy water she had specially prepared, placing a camera nearby in hopes of capturing proof of spirits. As Seung-wook, acting as host, prepared to outline the live stream schedule, a loud bang echoed, and the door behind him slammed shut on its own. Coincidentally, it was the director's office. Everyone froze in shock, but the stranger it seemed, the more thrilled they became, thinking of the massive views and fame. Seung-wook quickly led them into the office to investigate, but all they saw was ruin and decay. Then they noticed an old photograph of the female director with her patients. In the photo, all the patients stared eerily into the distance, while the director alone looked calmly into the camera, and the unsettling contrast sent chills down their spines. They also found a photo of the director playing ping pong, which reminded them of another rumor. It was said the sound of ping pong balls could often be heard there, believed by some to be the ghost of the director. But as they whispered about it, another strange event occurred. With a sudden crash, a pile of hair fell from the ceiling. While they were frozen in fear, the livestream audience skyrocketed. After they calmed down, Seung-wook laid out the next plan. He and Sung-hoon would hold a ritual in the director's office to summon the vengeful spirits. The others will split into 2 groups and continue exploring. Charlotte and Ji-hyun went deeper into the first floor. To leave a mark, Charlotte wrote her name on the wall, deliberately placing it above the graffiti that read, "Alive." Soon they entered what looked like a laboratory, messy and scattered with medical records and drugs. Inside a cabinet, a strange doll caught Ji-hyun's attention. It seemed familiar, but before she could think further, the sound of shattering glass pierced the silence. Charlotte had accidentally kicked over a jar, inside of which was a foul-smelling, featherless chicken. The scene shifted to Jae-yoon and Ah-yeon, who had reached the 3rd floor. The main attraction here was a bathroom, rumored to be where many patients had died and the most haunted part of the hospital. On the shower wall was a dark imprint, uncannily shaped like a human figure. Already timid, Ji-yoon grew increasingly nervous, and even the lines he had prepared in advance were spoken with a trembling voice. It wasn't until he ventured deeper into the bath area that the sudden appearance of half a human head left him stammering in terror. Ah-yeon, calmer than him, took a closer look and realized it was only a wig, clearly a prank left by previous visitors. Ha-jun, watching from the control room, didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. Then the view switched back to Ji-hyun and Charlotte, who had now climbed to the 4th floor, standing before the most terrifying door of all. Room 402. Ji-hyun introduced to the live audience that this room was once used to treat critical patients. But ever since the hospital was abandoned, no one had ever gone inside, and everyone who tried to open this door had failed, and later ended their lives without reason. The highlight of today's live broadcast was to be the first to achieve opening this door. As Ji-hyun spoke back at the base camp, team leader Ha-jun was overjoyed because the number of viewers had already reached 55,000, and at this rate, hitting 1 million was clearly not a problem. Soon after, the 6 regrouped and solemnly stepped once more into the director's office. Inside, red strings and bells were hung everywhere, and the desk was covered with talismans, rice, and cinnabar for the ritual. Ah-yeon knelt before the table, placed an incense stick, and burned a yellow talisman filled with incantations, ending the ritual hastily. They sat in silence on the floor waiting, but in the blink of an eye, the candles on the desk suddenly went out without warning, and the bells above began to shake violently. As they panicked, the red strings snapped, fear exploded instantly, and they screamed and ran in chaos. Only after they had fled far away from the room and all sounds had stopped, did they finally breathe again. Seung-wook did not forget the live stream, forcing himself to explain to the viewers what had just happened, swearing there was definitely something unclean here, but that they would press on, despite the danger. Then, Ha-jun played back the live feed to give everyone a break before heading to the next location. But what no one knew was that Seung-wook and Sung-hoon had secretly returned to the director's office, calling Ha-jun on the phone. It turned out everything earlier had been staged between them, meant only to lure in more viewers. And as expected, the live audience quickly broke past 100,000. But just as Ha-jun hung up the call, the portable stove beside him suddenly ignited by itself, and the computer on the desk began to flicker strangely. He scrambled to fix it, only for the room to be swallowed in darkness again. And seeing this, Ha-jun nearly lost control. Luckily, the computer soon lit back up, but the live broadcast picture continued to flicker in bizarre ways. Ha-jun paid no attention, completely unaware that the real nightmare was already closing in. Inside the hospital, they came again to the supposed laboratory. The stench was still thick, and the featherless chicken still lay where it had been. But what startled Ji-hyun and Charlotte was that the doll, clearly placed in the cabinet before, had somehow moved to a shelf on the other side. Hearing this, Ha-jun immediately ordered Seung-wook to hold the doll up to the camera because he had just made a bigger discovery. The doll was identical to the one held by a patient in the group photo. Seeing Seung-wook's action, Charlotte broke down instantly, bolting from the room without looking back. As a seasoned explorer, she knew such objects should never be touched, or they would bring disaster. Ironically, this instinctive panic sent the viewership soaring past 200,000. When this segment of the stream ends, Ha-jun, Seung-wook, and Sung-hoon can't stop laughing again, because this too was part of their pre-arranged plan to create hype. Unaware of the truth, Charlotte insisted firmly on leaving, but Ha-jun and the others would never let go of such a perfect tool for attention. With their persuasion, and Seung-wook's sincere apology, promising never to touch anything again, Charlotte finally relented and agreed to continue. Next, they entered another room, a group treatment hall. The ceiling had completely collapsed, and around them were scattered wooden cabinets shaped eerily like coffins. Seung-wook explained as he moved closer, then reached his hand inside, starting another performance. The sudden stunt pushed viewership even higher. But one strange event after another made Ji-hyun suspicious, and when she overheard Ha-jun urging Seung-wook to redo it for a close-up, she decided to test it herself. She boldly pushed her own hand inside, and just as she thought, nothing happened at first. But in the very next second, when they finally pulled Ji-hyun back out, her arm bore 4 bloody claw marks, leaving everyone stunned. And it was not over, because the real terror came next. A sharp cracking sound echoed, and one cabinet door slowly creaked open, revealing only emptiness inside. At the same time, Charlotte's scarf was suddenly lifted by an unseen force. Everyone froze in fear and bolted out of the room. But they had no time to catch their breath, because the first chilling sign was waiting for them, where Charlotte had written her name. The graffiti that once read "Alive" had now changed to "Suicide." At that moment, Ji-hyun was completely consumed by terror. Charlotte breaks down crying again, convinced that this is clearly a curse. So Ji-hyun and Charlotte no longer hesitated, ignoring everyone's attempts to stop them, and without a second thought they turned and ran out without looking back. Elsewhere, Ha-jun stared wide-eyed too because he had just seen this incomprehensible scene on the playback himself. But when Seung-wook and Sung-hoon questioned him, he put profit first, calmly insisting that Ji-hyun was mistaken, claiming the words on the wall had never changed and had always read suicide. Human nature was laid bare in that moment. After convincing the two to continue the stream, Ha-jun then spotted something even more chilling on the footage. All 6 members were standing inside the frame. So who was the 7th person holding the camera? As if to stop him from thinking further, the lights in the tent abruptly went out, and the live broadcast cut off instantly. While he cursed in helpless rage, the screen suddenly flickered back on. Right then, Seung-wook contacted him. The team inside the hospital had discussed and set new terms. They would risk continuing, but only if he shared another 20% of the profits. Ha-jun instinctively wanted to refuse, but with 700,000 viewers watching, he knew he had no room to bargain. Back with Charlotte and Ji-hyun, once outside the hospital, they finally breathed a sigh of relief. They thought it was all over at last, but they never imagined that the true nightmare was only beginning. Carefully retracing their path, they soon see the tree they marked on their way in, but then something strange happens. No matter how they walked, they always ended up back under the same tree. At that moment, a familiar stench spread in the air. Charlotte looked down, and the ground was littered with the very debris from the laboratory, including that foul, featherless chicken. In total collapse, she screamed Ji-hyun's name with all her strength, her voice nearly torn apart. But when she turned back, she froze. Ji-hyun was suddenly standing still like a lifeless shell, unmoving as if her soul had been taken. Charlotte forced herself to swallow her fear and carefully walked forward. Yet the moment she touched Ji-hyun, at the height of her terror, an unseen force yanked her hair, hoisting her violently into the air. She endured the searing pain, struggling desperately until she broke free and rushed into the darkness. Meanwhile, the others had reached the 4th floor and entered the bathroom. They only intended to make a quick stop and then leave, but just then, a loud crash echoed from the storage room behind them. Though their nerves were frayed, hearing Ha-jun's orders through the earpiece and lured by the promise of extra payment, Seung-wook and Sung-hoon pushed themselves to go inside. As they looked around, a wheelchair rolled out from the corner, and in the next second, the door behind them slammed shut with force. When they turned again, they saw in horror that every piece of furniture was floating in the air, then suddenly crashing back down. Soon debris began flying wildly in every direction, as if some disturbed presence was venting rage in its rawest form. Amid the chaos, Seung-wook was struck down, falling unconscious instantly. Sung-hoon, torn between helping his companion and saving himself, failed to notice the door swing open again. And in the very moment Sung-hoon lost consciousness, the live viewership quietly climbed to 800,000. Now we return to Charlotte, witnessing her most desperate moment. In her frantic escape, she spotted the tent ahead, as if it were her last hope, and she rushed toward it without hesitation. But strangely, though it appeared lit from outside, inside was total darkness. She called out Ha-jun's name in panic, only to realize the despairing truth. She had never left the hospital at all, and Ji-hyun is still standing there like a soulless puppet, motionless in the corner. What terrified her the most was that the eerie doll was now lying at her feet. Fear and hopelessness surged over her like a tide, drowning her reason. Then came footsteps approaching, and she slowly raised her head, seeing the twisted, grotesque, clearly non-human monster before her. Her body instantly stiffens, and even her breath seems to freeze. She had tried to open the door beside her, but with every move she made, the creature slid sideways with her. At last, reaching the door, she stretched out a trembling hand, only to find it sealed shut, impossible to open. She glanced back cautiously. The endless torment and agony became unbearable for Charlotte, and she pounded on the door with all her strength, crying out for help in desperation. Elsewhere, the unconscious Sung-hoon slowly opened his eyes. Then he sprinted desperately toward the 4th floor, trying to warn Jae-yoon and Ayeon to run for their lives. At that moment, they were still tirelessly cutting into the door of room 402, completely unaware of everything the others had gone through. Seeing Sung-hoon trying to interrupt the stream, Ha-jun panics. The viewer count has now reached 990,000, and success is within reach. He no longer cared about ghosts or death. He strapped on his gear and rushed into the hospital, determined to open room 402 himself and finish it. But he didn't know that an unprecedented horror was unfolding right at the door of room 402. First, a ping-pong ball rolled toward them out of nowhere. Then the doorknob began turning slowly on its own, followed by Charlotte's desperate cries for help from inside. They rushed forward, but the door was locked tight, refusing to open. As their panic grew, the hallway lights flickered madly, and Ayan's EMF detector spiked into chaos. Then, as if mocking them, the door that no one had ever opened swung wide by itself. When the spotlight crashed to the ground, they realized in horror that they were inside the legendary room 402. Looking around, not only are there no doors to escape, but the floor is also covered in stagnant water. Even the ceiling was shrouded in water, and the entire space seemed trapped in an upside-down abyss. Then, through the camera, Sung-hoon caught sight of a shadowy figure in the corner, invisible to the naked eye. When he raised the lens again, the figure vanished, replaced by the countless vengeful souls who had perished here, their screams and cries echoing endlessly. Meanwhile, completely unaware of everything that had happened, Ha-jun arrived at the door of room 402. Seeing it wide open, he cautiously stepped inside, but what he saw was not the inverted abyss that Sung-hoon and the others had witnessed, but the scene of despair that Charlotte had once endured. He called out his teammates' names, but the space was empty. No one was there, no one, except the shadow slowly pressing against his back. At that moment, Ha-jun truly felt the same terror and despair his companions had faced. All he could do was tremble, too afraid to move, turning the camera slowly in his hands. But the nightmare was still far from over. In another room, Seung-wook slowly regained consciousness, horrified to find himself tied to a wheelchair in the fourth-floor corridor. The chair, under an unseen force, began to rotate slowly, then raced violently toward room 402. Along the way, behind each door, pairs of dark and icy eyes flickered into sight. Those were the patients who had died unjustly, and they were to be his companions from then on. Finally, with the door of 402 slamming shut behind him, silence fell once more. On screen, the live broadcast showed only 503 viewers, with a handful of puzzled comments asking why the stream had ended so soon. From the very beginning, there had never been 1 million viewers. The broadcast had ended the moment the power first went out, and the screen flickered. Everything since then was the work of the spirits of Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital, or perhaps the director himself. Driven by greed and human desire, Ha-jun and his team had walked step by step into the abyss with no return. And when it was all over, the director rose slowly within the broadcast frame and vanished quietly into the screen. Only then did the nightmare truly come to an end.